The small town of Millfield was buzzing with excitement that evening. Lanterns hung from wooden posts, swinging gently in the cool autumn wind, and children ran between the stalls, their laughter echoing across the dusty fairgrounds. Music from the calliope spun a cheerful tune, mixing with the chatter of townsfolk and the occasional bark of a dog. The air smelled of roasted corn, fresh bread, and the faint tang of horses from nearby stables. Everyone seemed to have gathered in the town square, where the biggest attraction of the season had arrived. A traveling show with a marksmanship challenge that promised fame, fortune, and a touch of danger. Mateo walked slowly along the edges of the crowd, his worn boots kicking up small puffs of dust. He was a quiet man in his early 30s, tall and steady, with a face weathered from years of hard work on his farm. His dark eyes scanned the crowd, taking in the excited faces, the colorful banners, and the imposing tent at the center that promised the daring challenge. Mateo had been in the army years ago, trained in precision and focus, but now he led a simple life. His days were filled with tending to his crops, repairing fences, and caring for his small herd of cattle. He didn't seek adventure, but tonight, the sight of the show made his heart beat a little faster. The main tent was adorned with bright colors and bold letters that read, "Shoot the apple off her head and she's yours." A cheer went up from the crowd as a young woman stepped into view, her hands steady despite the hundreds of eyes on her. She was Lila, a performer with the traveling show. Her hair was tied back in a neat braid, and she carried herself with confidence, though the faint tremor in her fingers betrayed the nervousness she hid behind her calm expression. Lila had been performing in traveling shows for several years. She had learned to be brave in public, to smile at the audience, and to face dangerous challenges without letting fear show. Behind her calm eyes, though, she carried a story of struggle, a childhood spent in a home that offered little safety, a life that demanded she entertain and take risks to survive. In her pocket, she kept a small locket, worn and faded, that held a picture she never showed anyone. Mateo felt a knot of unease in his chest as he watched. The ringleader of the show, a tall man named Roland, paced in front of the tent. His bright coat shimmered under the lantern light, and his voice carried easily over the murmuring crowd. "Who among you is brave enough to try?" he shouted, grinning broadly. "Who will win the prize, settle their debts, and earn the admiration of this fine town?" The crowd cheered, some shouting their names, others waving coins and bills. A few men nudged each other, whispering bets and daring one another to step forward. Mateo stayed at the edge, unwilling to let his curiosity or his needs completely take over. He had come to the fair to sell his produce and perhaps earn a few extra dollars, not to risk someone's life or his own. Yet as he watched the challenge, he could not help but feel drawn in. People began whispering about him, noticing his tall frame and calm presence. "He could do it," someone muttered. Another added, "If anyone can hit that apple, it's him." The words were both flattering and frightening. Mateo had never sought attention, and now all eyes seemed to be on him. Roland's voice rose again, more insistent this time. "Step up, brave man. Shoot the apple from Lila's head and claim your prize. Money, fame, even a companion if you win. Don't let this chance pass." The words were meant to excite, to thrill, to push someone into acting without thinking. Mateo felt a tension tighten in his chest. He remembered his training, the countless hours of focus and discipline. He remembered the faces of his comrades lost in reckless moments. Danger was no joke, and yet, here it was offered as a spectacle for the crowd's entertainment. Lila adjusted her stance on the platform, placing the apple carefully on her head. She looked calm, almost serene, but Mateo noticed the quick flick of her eyes to the side, the slight quiver of her hands. She was performing, yes, but she was also aware of the risk, aware that someone's hand could slip, aware that the audience demanded spectacle over safety. Mateo's mind raced. He thought about the money he needed to pay his debts, about the farm that had survived a dry season and still needed care, about the possibility of gaining respect in a town that sometimes felt cold and indifferent. And yet he thought about the risk, the real, sharp possibility that Lila could be hurt. The crowd grew louder, sensing hesitation. A local man, big and boisterous, called out, "Do it, Mateo! Show us you have courage." His voice carried over the music and chatter, and several townsfolk nodded in agreement. Mateo's eyes met Lila's for a brief moment. There was a trust there, unspoken and fragile. She had chosen to stand here, to risk herself for the show, and she had done so with bravery. He felt a strange connection, something he could not name, something that made his heart tighten. Her eyes held a quiet defiance, a spark of life that spoke of hardships endured and strength gained. Roland clapped his hands, increasing the pressure. "Time is short, brave man. The crowd waits, the prize awaits, and your fame begins now." The words were sharp, urgent. Matteo raised his hand slightly, feeling the weight of the rifle in his grasp. He felt the cold metal against his skin, the familiar sensation of focus settling in his mind. Yet a memory flashed across him, a childhood friend, a neighbor, someone he had lost long ago. The resemblance was uncanny, though he could not be certain. The sight of Lila's locket glinting faintly in the lantern light brought the memory into sharper focus. Matteo's heart pounded. He thought of the responsibilities he carried, the life he had built, the quiet hope of a peaceful future. He thought of the risks, the possibility of a mistake, the cheers that could turn to cries in a heartbeat. He thought of Lila, standing tall yet trembling, trusting a stranger to hold her life in his hands. The moral weight pressed down on him, heavier than the rifle, heavier than the crowd's expectations. For a long moment, time seemed to slow. The children stopped running, the music softened, and even the wind seemed to pause. The crowd held its breath, sensing the critical moment. Matteo stepped forward, placing himself carefully at the line. He adjusted his stance, feeling the rough ground beneath his boots, the tension in the rifle, the pull of responsibility. Every sense was heightened. The smell of lantern oil, the faint sweat on Lila's brow, the murmur of the townsfolk. He raised his eyes to hers again. There was something familiar there, something that tugged at a memory he could not yet name. Something human, something alive, something that made the idea of treating this as mere spectacle impossible. Matteo swallowed hard. His fingers trembled slightly, not from fear but from the weight of choice. He could do the stunt, earn the money, and satisfy the crowd. Or he could pause, consider, and ensure that no harm would come to Lila, even if it meant angering Roland and disappointing the onlookers. The crowd's whispers grew louder, a rising tide of anticipation. "Shoot the apple. He can do it. Don't let her get hurt." Some voices carried excitement, others carried doubt. Matteo's mind moved in circles, calculating the angle, the risk, the morality of the act. He remembered the army, the drills, the precision required to ensure safety. And then he remembered something more fragile, the humanity behind the challenge. Behind every cheer, behind every bet was a person, a life that could be altered in a single heartbeat. Matteo took a deep breath. He felt the pulse in his neck, the steadying beat of his own heart. He could hear Lila's calm breathing, almost steady enough to reassure him. He could see her eyes, wide and trusting, glinting with courage and fear. And in that moment he understood. This was no longer a test of skill, of fame, or of money. It was a test of conscience, a test of character. Could he perform the stunt without harm? Could he act with integrity in the face of expectation? Could he do what was right, not what was easy? Step by step he raised the rifle, careful, measured, aware. The crowd's voices faded into a blur, replaced by the steady rhythm of his own focus. Lila adjusted the apple gently, her eyes meeting his one last time. Matteo felt a connection stronger than any promise of reward or applause. He felt the weight of responsibility, the gravity of choice, the human heartbeat of the challenge before him. And then he paused. Just a moment, long enough to make the crowd lean forward, long enough for a spark of realization to cross his mind, long enough for destiny to bend slightly in an unexpected way. He was not just aiming at an apple. He was aiming at a moment that would define courage, kindness, and wisdom in equal measure. The choice was his, and whatever happened next would mark the beginning of a story no one would forget. Matteo's hands felt steady despite the thrum of tension running through him. The rifle rested in his palms like an extension of his own will, yet every fiber of his being screamed caution. Lila's eyes met his once more, wide and trusting, and for a moment he saw more than just a performer on a stage. He saw a person, a life, a story, a fragile human heartbeat, and in that instant, the challenge lost all its appeal as mere spectacle. The crowd waited, a single collective breath held as the seconds stretched. Children perched on the edges of barrels, women clutched their shawls, and men nudged one another, daring the other to flinch first. Roland paced impatiently, his bright coat shimmering under the lantern lights. "Time is money, brave man, shoot!" he shouted, his voice sharp and commanding. But Matteo barely heard him. The shouts, the calls, the bets, everything blurred. His mind was clear, narrowed, focused not on applause but on the single person in front of him. Lila stood tall on the platform, the apple balanced perfectly on her head. She shifted slightly, adjusting to the uneven wooden boards, and Mateo noticed the faint glint of her locket, swinging gently against her chest. The image stirred something deep within him, a memory long buried. He remembered a girl he once knew years ago, who had the same fearless spark in her eyes, the same careful way of holding herself even in danger. His chest tightened. Could it be a coincidence? Or had fate led him to this exact moment? The first moment of hesitation passed, and Mateo took a steadying breath. He remembered the army, the countless drills, the precise focus needed to succeed and survive. But this was different. This was not a battlefield. This was a test of humanity, a test of conscience. Could he aim at an object placed on someone he now saw as real, as alive, and still maintain his own sense of integrity? Could he perform the task without endangering her? The question weighed on him more than any crowd or ringleader ever could. He adjusted his stance, aligning the rifle carefully. Every muscle tensed in readiness, but his mind was calm like the eye of a storm. His eyes flicked to the apple. It was bright, round, and deceptively harmless, but he knew what it represented: the gamble, the bet, the fleeting thrill that people craved at the cost of real risk. Mateo could almost hear the unspoken question in the air. Would he choose the easy path, the applause, the prize? Or would he choose the one that required courage beyond skill? As he focused, a memory emerged more vividly. He remembered his first day at the army camp, a boy fresh from the fields, eyes wide with excitement and fear. He had learned discipline there, to respect both power and life. A comrade had once whispered to him, "Skill is nothing without heart." Those words now resonated in the cool evening air, mingling with the sounds of the fair. Mateo understood that skill alone could win the challenge, but heart, that was what defined a person. He could feel the tension radiating from Lila, though she remained outwardly composed. Her fingers gripped the edge of the platform, knuckles white, her breathing controlled but uneven. Mateo's heart beat faster, not from fear but from the awareness of responsibility. She trusted him, even as the ringleader shouted and the crowd leaned forward, anticipating drama. In that trust he found a strange courage, a clarity that guided his next move. Instead of aiming directly at the apple in a way that could risk harm, Mateo made a quiet decision. He adjusted his aim slightly, not to harm but to perform a trick that he had practiced long ago in his private hours on the farm. A small, calculated tap against the apple's edge would cause it to roll off harmlessly, leaving Lila untouched. It was a skill born from patience, precision, and respect, a skill that required more courage than shooting straight. He took another deep breath, feeling the rough wood beneath his boots and the cool metal of the rifle in his hands. The crowd grew louder, sensing the climax of the spectacle. Someone shouted, "Do it, Mateo! Don't chicken out!" Others cheered blindly, unaware of the delicate balance of choice and risk before them. Mateo's eyes never left Lila. He saw the flicker of fear in her pupils, the trust in her stance, the way she seemed to hold herself steady despite the danger she faced. That trust became his anchor, guiding his actions. Then he moved. The shot rang out, sharp but controlled, and the apple tumbled from Lila's head, rolling to the side harmlessly. A collective gasp rose from the crowd, followed by stunned silence. Mateo lowered the rifle, his hands steady, and stepped forward. Lila blinked in surprise, then broke into a relieved smile, a mix of gratitude and awe. The tension in her shoulders melted, replaced by a warmth that reached Mateo as well. He had succeeded without causing harm, without sacrificing integrity for applause. Roland's face twisted in confusion and anger. He had expected a dramatic moment, a gasp of danger, perhaps even an accident that would thrill the crowd. Instead, he found himself facing a reality he could not control. Mateo had performed the stunt with skill and safety, exposing the ringleader's reliance on spectacle and danger. The crowd, initially unsure, began to cheer, not for the promised prize or a shallow spectacle, but for the courage and wisdom Mateo had displayed. Some townsfolk clapped, others nodded in silent respect. Even the children laughed, delighted that no one had been hurt. Mateo helped Lila down from the platform. She brushed her hands together, her smile wide and genuine. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice soft but filled with relief. "I knew you wouldn't let anything happen." Mateo nodded, feeling an unexpected lightness in his chest. The moment was not about reward or fame anymore. It was about doing what was right, about respecting life, and about the quiet power of courage. As they walked away from the platform, Roland tried to regain control, shouting about rules, prizes, and debts owed. But the crowd had shifted. People murmured among themselves, some offering congratulations to Mateo, others shaking their heads at the failed theatrics. Mateo and Lila moved toward the edge of the fair, away from the loud voices, allowing the night air to wash over them. The smell of roasted corn and horses lingered, but it no longer felt chaotic. It felt alive, real, and full of possibility. Mateo asked softly, "Why did you do it? Why stand there risking yourself?" Lila looked at him, her eyes reflecting both past hardships and newfound relief. "I had to," she said simply. "It's what I know. It's all I've had to survive." Mateo nodded, understanding more than words could express. He had seen enough danger in his life to know that courage was not just about facing risks. It was about trusting oneself and others, about making choices that honored life instead of exploiting it. They walked together through the fair, the lanterns casting soft golden light across their path. Children ran past them, laughing and pointing, oblivious to the lessons unfolding nearby. Mateo could feel a connection forming, not romantic or fleeting, but human and real. Lila shared small stories of her past, brief, careful glimpses that revealed resilience, humor, and intelligence. Mateo shared nothing of his past directly, but his calm presence and steady gaze communicated trust and integrity. The fair began to wind down. Stalls were closing, the music softened, and the last lanterns flickered. Mateo looked around at the townsfolk, some still talking about the daring feat, others quietly reflecting on the courage they had witnessed. He realized that the moment would be remembered not for the promised prize, not for the excitement, but for the choice he had made, to act with care, to respect another life, to show that heroism was more than spectacle. As the night deepened, Mateo and Lila reached the edge of the fairgrounds. They paused, looking back at the bright tents, the emptying stalls, and the shadows stretching long across the ground. "You know," Lila said softly, "I think people will remember this even if they don't understand why." "They'll feel it," Mateo nodded. He understood. The true story was not the apple, the rifle, or the crowd. It was the courage to act rightly, the decision to protect instead of perform, the quiet heroism that often goes unseen. Mateo turned to her and smiled faintly. "I didn't do it for them," he said. "I did it because it was the right thing to do, because someone trusted me." Lila nodded, her own smile reflecting gratitude and recognition. The bond formed in that moment was simple, honest, and profound. It was not about reward or recognition. It was about human connection, integrity, and trust. As they parted ways that evening, each carrying a quiet sense of accomplishment and relief, Mateo felt something shift within him. He understood more clearly than ever that courage is measured not by applause but by choices, that skill is nothing without heart, and that human life is more valuable than any spectacle, prize, or bet. The fair would be remembered. Yes, but not for the apple, the rifle, or the danger. It would be remembered for the quiet act of bravery, for the respect shown to another person, and for the wisdom that sometimes the hardest choice is the right one. Mateo returned to his farm the next day with a lighter heart. The debts he carried were still there, but the sense of peace and moral clarity he had gained outweighed the worry. Lila continued her performances, but now with a renewed respect for her own safety and dignity. Their paths might not cross often, but the bond of that evening remained, a shared understanding that courage, wisdom, and respect could change lives far more than spectacle ever could. The sun rose over Millfield, bathing the town in golden light.